The Mafia boss gives a makeover to a simple woman. Her new sophisticated look stuns everyone. That is exactly what happened in the heart of New York City in the fall of 2023, when a man who controlled half the underground economy of the Eastern Seaboard looked across a crowded diner and saw something no one else bothered to see. A woman, not a beautiful woman, not by the standards the world usually applauds, not someone who turned heads or commanded attention when she walked into a room. She was the kind of person your eyes skip over, the kind who blends into the wallpaper of life, invisible and unremarkable. But Vincent Moretti did not see what everyone else saw. He saw something far more dangerous than beauty. He saw potential. And what happened next, the transformation, the whispers, the betrayal, and the moment that left an entire empire speechless, is a story that will stay with you long after it ends. But before we get there, we need to go back to a Tuesday morning in late October, when the air in Manhattan carried that first real bite of cold, and the leaves in Central Park had turned the color of rust and fire. Margaret Ellen Hayes, Maggie as everyone called her, had worked the morning shift at Rosario's Diner on 10th Avenue for 11 years. 11 years of pouring coffee, wiping down counters, memorizing orders, and smiling at people who never once asked her name. She was 41 years old, though she looked older. Not because life had been cruel to her in any dramatic way, but because it had been indifferent, which is sometimes worse. She wore the same rotation of 3 sweaters, all of them faded, all of them too large for her thin frame. Her hair, a dull shade of brown, streaked with early grey, was always pulled back in a loose ponytail that she never bothered to style. She wore no makeup. She had no jewelry, except a thin silver chain her mother had given her before passing away 6 years earlier. Maggie was not ugly. She was simply unseen. She lived alone in a studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen, a 4th-floor walk-up with a window that faced a brick wall. The apartment was clean but sparse. A single bed, a small television that she rarely turned on, a shelf of paperback novels, and a kitchen counter barely wide enough to hold a cutting board. She had no social media accounts. She had no close friends outside of work. She spoke to her younger sister in Ohio once a month, conversations that were polite but hollow, filled with the kind of small talk that substitutes for real connection. Maggie had not always been this way. There had been a time, in her 20s, when she had laughed easily, when she had worn bright colors and danced at weddings, and believed that the world had something extraordinary waiting for her just around the next corner. But corners have a way of leading to more corners, and somewhere along the way, Maggie had stopped expecting anything at all. She had been engaged, once to a man named Paul, a construction foreman who had seemed solid and dependable until the night she came home early from a shift and found him with someone else in their bed. That was 12 years ago. She had not been on a date since. The regulars at Rosario's liked Maggie well enough. She was efficient and quiet, never got an order wrong, and had the rare gift of knowing when someone wanted to talk and when they wanted to be left alone. The owner, Sal Rosario, a 72-year-old, Italian-American with a bad hip and a good heart, treated her like family. He had given her a raise 3 years ago without her asking, and every Christmas he handed her an envelope with a bonus and a card that said the same thing every year. "You're the backbone of this place, kid." It was a small life, a life lived in the margins, and Maggie had made peace with it, or at least she had convinced herself she had, which is not quite the same thing, but close enough to get through most days. On that particular Tuesday morning, the diner was busy with its usual crowd. Construction workers grabbing egg sandwiches before their shifts, a couple of nurses from Mount Sinai sipping decaf after a long night. An elderly man named Arthur, who came in every single day at 7:15, ordered the same thing, black coffee and a plain bagel, toasted, and read the newspaper cover to cover. Maggie moved through the familiar choreography of the morning rush with the practiced ease of someone who could do it in her sleep, and sometimes felt like she was. She did not notice the black SUV that pulled up outside at 8:45. She did not see the driver step out and open the rear door. She did not register the 2 men in dark suits who entered first, scanning the room with the calm efficiency of professionals, before stepping aside to let a third man enter behind them. Vincent Moretti was 53 years old, and he did not look like what most people imagine when they hear certain words associated with his line of work. He was tall, 6'2", with a lean build that he maintained through daily swimming at a private club on the Upper East Side. His hair was silver at the temples, dark everywhere else, and always impeccably groomed. He wore a charcoal cashmere overcoat over a navy suit that had been tailored in Milan. His shoes were handmade. His watch was understated but worth more than most people's cars. Everything about him communicated control, controlled wealth, controlled power, controlled danger. Vincent had been born in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, the eldest son of Dominic Moretti, who had himself been the eldest son of Salvatore Moretti, who had come to America from a small village outside Naples in 1947, with nothing but a suitcase and a willingness to do whatever was necessary. 3 generations had built an empire that operated in the spaces between legitimate business and something else entirely: construction, waste management, real estate development, private security, and a dozen other ventures that generated enormous revenue, not all of which appeared on any tax return. Vincent had taken over the family's operations 15 years ago, after his father's health declined, and he had expanded them significantly, with a sophistication and strategic intelligence that his predecessors had lacked. He was feared. He was respected. He was, by any measure, one of the most powerful men in New York City, though his name rarely appeared in newspapers, and he preferred it that way. He had a penthouse on Central Park West, a house in the Hamptons, a villa on the Amalfi Coast, and a private art collection that would have made museum curators weep. He had been married once, briefly in his 30s, to a woman named Celeste who had been beautiful and ambitious and ultimately unable to tolerate the reality of who he was. The divorce had been quiet, expensive, and final. He had no children. He had no intention of marrying again. Vincent Moretti did not eat at diners. He ate at restaurants where the maitre d' knew his name and his table was always waiting. He drank wine that cost more per bottle than Maggie made in a week. He moved through a world of wealth and power that existed on a completely different plane from the world of Rosario's diner. And yet, here he was, sitting in a booth by the window because his driver had taken a wrong turn trying to avoid construction on 9th Avenue, and because Vincent had seen the diner and on a whim he could not explain, had told his men to stop. He wanted coffee, real coffee, not the precious artisanal nonsense served at the cafes his associates frequented. Diner coffee, the kind his father used to drink. Maggie approached the booth without looking up from her notepad. She had registered the suits, the expensive coats, the general aura of importance, but Rosario's was in Midtown. They got all types: Wall Street guys, theater people, tourists who wandered in, looking lost. She had learned long ago not to be impressed. "Morning," she said. "What can I get you?" Vincent looked up at her, and something happened. It was not a thunderbolt. It was not love at first sight. It was something quieter and in its own way more profound. He saw her face, tired, makeup-free, framed by that careless ponytail, and he saw in it a quality he had spent years searching for and never finding in the polished, perfected faces of the women who moved through his world. He saw authenticity. He saw someone who had not been manufactured, sculpted, or designed to appeal. She was raw material, uncut stone. "Just coffee," he said. "Black. Coming right up." She turned to go. He watched her walk back to the counter, noting the way she moved, efficient, unhurried, completely without self-consciousness. She did not adjust her hair. She did not straighten her posture. She did not do any of the 1,000 small things that people do when they know they are being observed. Because she did not know. Because no one ever observed her. "Tony," Vincent said quietly to the man sitting across from him, his longtime advisor and closest confidant, Antonio Russo. "That woman." Tony followed his gaze. "The waitress? Tell me what you see." Tony studied Maggie for a moment as she poured coffee behind the counter. He saw what everyone saw: a plain, tired-looking woman in a worn sweater and an apron stained with coffee. I see a waitress, Vin. That's because you're not looking. What am I supposed to be looking at? Vincent did not answer immediately. He accepted the coffee Maggie brought back, thanked her, which surprised Tony because Vincent rarely thanked anyone for anything, and took a sip. It was terrible. He drank it anyway. Her bone structure, Vincent said after Maggie had moved on to another table. Look at her jawline, her cheekbones, the proportions of her face. She could be stunning. Tony blinked. You're kidding. When have you ever known me to kid? This was a fair point. Vincent Moretti did many things, but kidding was not among them. What are you thinking? Tony asked, because he had known Vincent for 30 years, and he recognized the expression on his face. It was the same expression Vincent wore when he was looking at a derelict building in a neglected neighborhood and seeing a luxury development. It was the expression of a man who saw value where others saw nothing. I'm thinking, Vincent said slowly, that I want to do something. Something like what? Something interesting. Tony waited. With Vincent, you always waited. I want to show her, Vincent said. I want to show everyone. That beauty isn't what they think it is. It isn't something you're born with or without. It's something that can be revealed, uncovered, like restoration work on a painting. The masterpiece is already there. You just have to remove what's covering it. Vin, she's a person, not a painting. I know she's a person. That's what makes it interesting. They finished their coffee. Vincent left a $100 bill on the table for a $6 cup of coffee, and they left. But he came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and every morning for the next 2 weeks. Maggie noticed, of course. It was hard not to notice a man like Vincent Moretti, even if you were someone like Maggie who had trained herself not to notice anyone. He was always polite. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee, sometimes a piece of toast. He always left an absurdly large tip. He never flirted, never said anything inappropriate, never made her uncomfortable. He just sat in his booth, drank his coffee, and watched the world go by. On the 14th day, he spoke to her, really spoke to her, beyond the mechanics of ordering. Margaret, he said. She startled slightly. How did he know her name? Then she remembered the small tag pinned to her apron. May I ask you something personal? She hesitated. Everything in her. Experience told her to be cautious, but there was something in his voice, something that was not predatory or manipulative, but genuinely curious, that made her stay. Depends on the question, she said. If someone offered to change your life, completely, fundamentally, would you say yes? She almost laughed. That's a pretty big hypothetical. Humor me. She thought about it, really thought about it, which surprised her, because she had stopped thinking about hypotheticals a long time ago. I guess it would depend on who was offering and what they wanted in return. Vincent nodded slowly as if she had passed some kind of test. What if they didn't want anything in return? Then I'd say nobody does anything for nothing. And I'd wonder what the catch was. He smiled. It was a small smile, but it transformed his face, made him look almost boyish. Smart woman. I've been called worse. Margaret, my name is Vincent Moretti. I'm a businessman. I have resources that most people don't, and I have an idea that I think could be extraordinary. I would like to offer you, says with no strings attached, no obligations, no expectations, a complete transformation. New wardrobe, styling, everything you need to look like the woman I believe you already are underneath all of this. He gestured vaguely at her sweater, her ponytail, her bare face. She stared at him. Are you serious? I am always serious. Why? Because I see something that other people don't, and because I can. She should have said no. Every rational instinct told her to say no. This was New York City. Strange men did not offer you things for free. There was always a price, always an angle, always a hidden cost. She had been a waitress long enough to know that the bigger the tip, the bigger the expectation behind it. But there was something else, something she had not felt in so long that she almost did not recognize it. Curiosity, and underneath the curiosity, buried deep in a place she had walled off. Years ago, Something even more dangerous. Hope. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take my card." He slid a heavy, cream-colored business card across the table. It had only a name and a phone number. No title, no company. "Call me when you decide." She slipped the card into her apron pocket and went back to work. But for the rest of the day she could feel it there, pressing against her hip like a small, persistent question. She did not call that night, or the next night. She held the card, turned it over in her fingers, set it on her bedside table, picked it up again. She Googled his name and found almost nothing. A few mentions in real estate articles, a photo from a charity gala, no social media presence. The absence of information was, paradoxically, more convincing than a mountain of it would have been. People who needed to prove their importance were rarely important. People who left no trace were the ones who had real power. On the third night she called. "I have conditions," she said when he answered. "I would expect nothing less. First, I want to know exactly what this involves, every detail, no surprises." "Agreed." "Second, I don't owe you anything afterward. Not dinner, not a date, not a favor. Nothing. You have my word." "Third, and this is the most important one, I want to understand why. The real reason, not because you see potential or because you can. The real reason." There was a long pause. When Vincent spoke again, his voice was quieter than she had heard it before. "My mother," he said. "Her name was Rosa. She came from nothing. She was a seamstress in Brooklyn. She was the most beautiful woman I ever knew. But the world never saw it, because the world only sees what it expects to see. She died believing she was ordinary. She was not ordinary, she was extraordinary. And I have carried that knowledge with me for 20 years, and I have never been able to do anything with it. Until now." Maggie was silent for a long time. "Okay," she said. "Finally. I'll do it. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, because stories like this one, stories about people the world overlooks and the moments that change everything, are exactly what we bring you every single week. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss one." The transformation began on a Saturday. Maggie had taken the day off from Rosario's, the first Saturday she had taken off in 3 years, and a black car arrived at her building at 8 in the morning. The driver, a polite young man named Marco, who clearly worked for Vincent, held the door open and said nothing about the neighborhood or the building's peeling paint or the garbage bags piled on the sidewalk. He simply drove. They went first to a salon on the Upper East Side, the kind of place Maggie had walked past 1,000 times, without ever imagining she would go inside. The exterior was unmarked. No sign, no logo, just a brushed steel door with a small buzzer. Inside, it was all white marble, and soft lighting, and the scent of something expensive that Maggie could not identify. A woman named Elena, who spoke with a slight Russian accent and moved with the confidence of someone who had been transforming faces for decades, was waiting. "Let me look at you," Elena said, tilting Maggie's face gently toward the light. She studied her the way a sculptor studies a block of marble, not with judgment, but with assessment, seeing not what was there, but what could be. "Beautiful bones," Elena murmured. "Why do you hide them?" "I'm not hiding anything," Maggie said. "I'm just not... You don't usually take care of yourself. I understand. Many women don't. Not because they don't deserve it, but because the world tells them they don't. The world is wrong." Elena began with her hair. She cut away the damaged ends, several inches of dry, brittle hair that Maggie had been meaning to trim for months but never had. She applied treatments that made Maggie's hair feel like silk for the first time she could remember. She colored it, not dramatically, not a transformation into some artificial shade, but a deepening and enriching of Maggie's natural color, bringing out warm undertones of chestnut and honey that had been buried under years of neglect. She styled it in a way that framed Maggie's face, accentuating her cheekbones and the clean line of her jaw that Vincent had noticed that first day in the diner. The makeup came next. Elena's philosophy was not to create a mask, but to enhance what was already there, to bring forward Maggie's best features and let the rest recede. She showed Maggie how to define her eyebrows, which were naturally well-shaped, but had been invisible under years of not being tended. She applied a foundation so light it was barely noticeable, but that evened Maggie's skin tone and gave her a quiet glow. She did something with her eyes, a subtle combination of shadow and liner that made their grey-green colour suddenly vivid, striking, impossible to ignore. "Look," Eleanor said, and turned the chair toward the mirror. Maggie looked, and for a long, suspended moment, she did not recognize herself. Not because she looked like a different person, but because she looked like a version of herself she had never met, a version that had been sleeping somewhere inside her, waiting. Her eyes were the same eyes, but they looked larger, more luminous. Her face was the same face, but its architecture was suddenly visible. The high cheekbones, the defined jawline, the elegant proportions that had been hidden under a veil of exhaustion and neglect. She looked like someone. She looked like someone who mattered. "Oh," she said softly. And then, to her horror, and Elena's complete lack of surprise, she began to cry. "They all cry," Elena said matter-of-factly, handing her a tissue. "It's because they're seeing themselves for the first time. It's overwhelming. Take a moment." Maggie took several moments. Then she dried her eyes, careful not to smudge Elena's work, and laughed. A real laugh, full and unguarded. The kind of laugh she had not produced in years. You look like you," Elena said firmly. "That's all. You just look like you." From the salon, Marco drove her to a building in Soho, a converted loft that turned out to be the private showroom of a personal stylist named David Chen. David was in his 40s, sharp-featured and impeccably dressed, with an energy that was simultaneously intense and calming. His space was filled with racks of clothing organized by color and occasion, shoes displayed like artwork, and accessories arranged with museum-like precision. "Vincent told me about you," David said, circling Maggie the way Eleanor had, with that same assessing gaze. "He was right. You've been dressing like you're trying to disappear." "Maybe I was." David stopped circling and looked at her directly. "Well, we're going to fix that." Over the next 4 hours, David rebuilt Maggie's wardrobe from the ground up. He started with the basics, well-fitted undergarments, which he explained were the foundation of everything else. Then he moved to what he called the architecture, perfectly tailored pants, skirts that hit at exactly the right point on her leg, blouses in fabrics that draped rather than hung. He chose colors that complemented her newly revealed coloring, deep emeralds, rich burgundies, warm creams, and navy blue that made her eyes look like sea glass. He explained everything as he worked, why certain cuts flattered her frame, why fabric quality mattered more than brand names, why the right pair of shoes could change the way a woman carried herself. He was not condescending, he was passionate, the way a teacher is passionate about a subject they love. And Maggie, who had spent her entire adult life thinking of clothing as purely functional, something to cover yourself with, nothing more, found herself genuinely fascinated. The final piece was a dress. David saved it for last, removing it from a garment bag with the reverence of a priest handling a sacred text. It was deep emerald green, made of a fabric that seemed to shift and shimmer with every movement. It was elegant without being ostentatious. No excessive embellishment, no dramatic plunging necklines, nothing that screamed for attention. It was the kind of dress that whispered, and in the whispering, demanded that the entire room fall silent to listen. "Try it on," David said. Maggie went behind the screen, slipped out of her old clothes, the faded jeans, the stretched-out sweater, and put on the dress. It fit, like it had been made for her. She stepped out, and David's expression, a man who had dressed some of the most celebrated women in New York, told her everything she needed to know. "My God," he said quietly. "Vincent really does have an eye." Later that afternoon, the car brought Maggie to Vincent's penthouse on Central Park West. She had never been in a building like this. Doormen in uniforms, a lobby that looked like a 5-star hotel, an elevator that opened directly into a private foyer. The penthouse itself was enormous, decorated with a spare, sophisticated taste that managed to be both luxurious and restrained. Art on the walls that she recognized even with her limited knowledge, dark, moody paintings that seemed to pulse with life. Vincent was waiting in the living room, standing by a wall of windows that overlooked the park. Tony was there too, sitting on a leather couch, along with a woman Maggie had not met, a striking blonde in her 50s, wearing a cream-colored suit. "Margaret," Vincent said, turning from the window. And then he stopped. He simply stopped, the way people stop when they encounter something that exceeds their expectations, even when their expectations are high. He stared at her for a long moment, and in his eyes, Maggie saw something that made her breath catch. Not desire, not possessiveness, but vindication, the look of a man who had been proven right. "I told you," he said, turning to Tony. "Didn't I tell you?" Tony was staring too. His mouth was slightly open. "Vin, Yeah, you told me." The woman in the cream suit stood. "I'm Diane Hartwell," she said, extending a hand. "I run Vincent's charitable foundation. He asked me to be here today as I suppose, as a witness." "A witness to what?" Maggie asked. Diane smiled. "To the moment we prove to the world that beauty is not a birthright. It's a revelation." What followed was something Maggie could not have imagined, not in her most elaborate fantasies, which were admittedly modest. Vincent, it turned out, had been planning something larger than a simple makeover, much larger. He had arranged for Maggie, with her permission, he emphasized, always with her permission, to attend a charity gala the following week. Not just any gala. The Moretti Foundation's annual fundraiser at the Plaza Hotel, the single most exclusive social event of the fall season. 600 guests, the wealthiest, most powerful, most beautiful people in the city. And Maggie would walk in among them, not as a waitress sneaking in through the service entrance, but as Vincent Moretti's personal guest. "Wait," Maggie said, holding up a hand. "A gala, like a ball, with those kinds of people? With exactly those kinds of people? I can't do that. I don't know what to say to those people. I don't know how to—" "That," Vincent interrupted gently, "is what the next week is for." He had hired a team, not just Elena and David, who would be on call for the night of the gala, but others, a voice coach named Patricia, who specialized in public speaking, a woman named Grace, who taught etiquette and social navigation, a former diplomat named Richard, who could teach anyone to make conversation with anyone about anything. A week of intensive preparation, a crash course in the art of existing, confidently in spaces that had never been designed for people like Maggie. It was at this moment that Maggie's instinct for self-preservation kicked in. She looked at Vincent, this powerful, wealthy, immaculately dressed man who was offering her the fairy tale she had stopped believing in, and she asked the question that mattered. What happens after? After what? After the gala, after the dress comes off and the makeup washes away, and I go back to pouring coffee at Rosario's. What happens then? Vincent was quiet for a moment. That depends on you. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one. I can give you this transformation, Margaret. I can give you the tools, the clothes, the knowledge, the confidence, but I can't tell you what to do with them. That's yours. She wanted to argue. She wanted to say that this was a cruel kind of kindness, showing someone a world they could never be part of and then sending them back to the one they came from. But she looked at her, reflection in the darkened window, the woman in the emerald dress with the luminous eyes, and she thought, maybe he's right. Maybe what happens after is up to me. Okay, she said, for the second time. I'll do it. The week that followed was the most intense of Maggie's life. Every morning, Marco picked her up and brought her to a different destination, voice lessons with Patricia, where she learned to modulate her tone and speak with authority without losing warmth. Sessions with Grace, who taught her how to hold a glass of champagne, how to navigate a crowded room, how to remember names, how to exit a conversation gracefully. Afternoons with Richard, who drilled her on current events, art, business, the kind of topics that would come up naturally at a gathering of the wealthy and powerful. She was a remarkable student, not because she was naturally gifted at any of these things, but because she was hungry for them in a way that surprised her. She had spent so long convincing herself that she did not care about the larger world, about appearance and social grace and the opinions of others, that she had forgotten how much she actually did care, how much she had always cared. She had not stopped wanting these things, she had simply stopped believing they were possible. On Thursday evening, 4 days before the gala, she was at Vincent's penthouse for a practice dinner, a rehearsal of sorts, where she would practice the skills she had learned in a realistic setting. Vincent, Tony, and Diane served as her practice guests, engaging her in conversation, introducing scenarios she might encounter. Halfway through the evening, something shifted. Maggie told a story about a regular at the diner, Arthur, the old man with his newspaper and plain bagel, and she told it with such warmth and humor and specificity that the table fell silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting for their turn to speak, but the absorbed silence of people who are genuinely captivated. When she finished, Diane turned to Vincent and said, "She doesn't need any more coaching." "I know," Vincent said. "She never did. She just needed to believe she was worth listening to." But not everyone in Vincent's world was pleased with this project. On Friday morning, Vincent received a visit from his younger brother, Michael Moretti. Michael was 47, shorter than Vincent, broader, with a face that had been handsome in his youth, but had hardened into something less. Welcoming. He managed the family's operations in New Jersey and had always resented living in his older brother's shadow. Where Vincent was strategic and patient, Michael was impulsive and territorial. Where Vincent sought to expand the family's legitimate interests, Michael clung to the old ways, the methods that had built the empire and, in his view, were the only things keeping it standing. Michael had heard about Maggie. In their world, everyone heard about everything. "What are you doing?" "Finn?" Michael demanded, standing in the penthouse living room with the aggressive posture of a man who had come to fight. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The waitress. You're bringing a waitress to the gala. Our gala. The gala where we host judges and politicians and business leaders. You're bringing some nobody off the street." "She's not nobody. She's a waitress from a diner on 10th Avenue, Vincent. She's nobody. And you're making the family look... Look what? Compassionate, generous, human?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Soft, you're making us look soft. People are talking. People always talk. That's what people do. This isn't a game. We have a reputation to maintain. We have relationships to protect. Do you know what Carmine DeLuca said when he heard? He laughed. He actually laughed. Let him laugh. You don't get it. You're so busy playing Pygmalion that you've forgotten who we are, what we are. We don't do charity cases, Vincent. We don't save stray cats." Vincent's expression, which had remained calm throughout Michael's tirade, went very still, very cold. It was a stillness that people who knew Vincent well had learned to fear far more than any outburst. "She is not a stray cat," Vincent said, his voice low and controlled. "She is a human being, and you will not speak about her that way again. Not in my home, not anywhere. Are we clear?" Michael held his brother's gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "Fine. Do what you want. You always do." After Michael left, Tony, who had witnessed the exchange from the doorway, sat down across from Vincent. "He's not wrong about one thing," Tony said carefully. "People are talking. Let them. I'm serious, Vin. Your brother is... He's got people who listen to him. If he decides this is weakness, if he uses it to... Michael is not going to do anything. He doesn't have the courage. Maybe not, but he's got friends who do." Vincent considered this. "I appreciate your concern, Tony, but I am not going to abandon this because my brother's ego is bruised. This matters. I can't explain why exactly, but it matters." Tony nodded slowly. He had known Vincent long enough to know when arguing was pointless. "Just be careful, for your sake and for hers." Meanwhile, Maggie was dealing with her own complications. She had told no one at work about what was happening. Not Sal, not her co-workers, not anyone. She came to work each day in her usual clothes, her hair pulled back, her face bare, as if nothing had changed. But something had changed, and it showed in small ways she could not entirely control. She stood a little straighter. She made more eye contact. She smiled more easily. One of the other waitresses, a sharp-eyed woman named Donna, noticed. "You're different," Donna said during a lull in the lunch rush. "Different how?" "I don't know. You're lighter. Like you're carrying less. Did you meet someone?" Maggie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "No, nothing like that." "Sure," Donna said, unconvinced. "Whatever you say." That night, alone in her apartment, Maggie tried on one of the outfits David had put together, a pair of perfectly fitted dark jeans, a cashmere sweater in a shade of soft grey, ankle boots with a low heel. She stood in front of the small mirror on the back of her bathroom door and looked at herself. Really looked. She thought about what Vincent had said about his mother, about Rosa, the seamstress from Brooklyn who had been extraordinary but had died believing she was ordinary. Maggie wondered how many women were walking around carrying that same burden, the weight of the world's indifference pressing them into shapes they were never meant to hold. She wondered if the transformation Vincent was offering was real, or if it was just a costume, a disguise that would eventually slip and reveal the same invisible woman underneath. She picked up her phone and called her sister in Ohio. "Karen, can I ask you something?" "Sure, what's up?" "Do you think people can really change? Not just on the outside, but really change?" There was a pause. "Where is this coming from?" "Just something I've been thinking about." "I think people can grow," Karen said carefully. "I think people can learn to see themselves differently, but I think the raw material has to be there. You can't become something you're not, but you can become more of what you already are." Maggie turned this over in her mind long after they hung up. More of what you already are. She looked at herself in the mirror again. Not the transformation, not the new clothes, but herself, the woman underneath it all. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not look away. The night of the gala arrived. October 28th. A cold, clear evening with a sky full of stars that the city's lights made invisible, but that were there nonetheless, burning above the glittering facade of the Plaza Hotel on Fifth Avenue. Maggie had spent the afternoon at Elena's salon, hairstyled, makeup applied with careful precision, every detail attended to. David had come personally to dress her, bringing the emerald dress and a pair of heels that added 3 inches to her height, and more importantly changed the entire way she moved, slower, more deliberate, more conscious of her own body in space. The final addition was a pair of diamond earrings, not large, not ostentatious, small, perfectly cut stones that caught the light with every turn of her head. Vincent had sent them with a note that said simply, "These were my mother's." Maggie held the earrings in her palm and felt their weight, not the physical weight, which was negligible, but the emotional weight, which was enormous. She understood what this gesture meant. She put them on and felt for the first time that this was not a costume. This was an inheritance. Marco drove her to the plaza. The car pulled up to the main entrance, where a red carpet had been laid, and photographers were positioned behind velvet ropes. Maggie's heart was hammering so loudly she was certain the driver could hear it. "You're going to be fine," Marco said, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror with a warmth that surprised her. "How do you know?" "Because Mr. Moretti doesn't make mistakes about people." She stepped out of the car. The flashbulbs started immediately, not for her specifically, since the photographers had no idea who she was, but because anyone arriving in a black car at the Moretti Foundation gala was, by definition, someone worth photographing. She walked the carpet alone, her chin lifted, her steps measured, her expression composed. She looked, to anyone watching, exactly like someone who belonged there. Inside the plaza's grand ballroom, 600 guests moved through a landscape of crystal chandeliers, towering flower arrangements, and candlelight. The women wore gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The men wore bespoke suits and watches that glinted like small declarations of victory. The room hummed with the particular energy of extreme wealth and power gathered in one place, an energy that was part celebration, part performance, and part careful negotiation. Vincent was waiting just inside the entrance. He was in a black tuxedo that made him look like he had stepped out of a classic film, elegant, commanding, and completely at ease. Tony was beside him, and Diane, and several others Maggie did not recognize. Vincent saw her come through the door, and this time he did not try to hide his reaction. His eyes widened. He drew in a slow breath, and then he did something that Maggie would remember for the rest of her life. He crossed the room to her, took her hand and raised it to his lips. "You look," he said quietly, "exactly like who you are. Not beautiful, not stunning, not gorgeous. Who you are." And Maggie understood in that moment that this was the greatest compliment Vincent Moretti knew how to give. He offered his arm and she took it, and together they walked into the ballroom. If you are watching this right now and this story is touching something in you, take a moment and leave a comment saying, "Everyone deserves to be seen." It is a small sentence, but it carries the weight of everything Maggie has been carrying for years. Leave that comment, because someone else watching needs to read it tonight. What happened next became, in the world of New York society, the story of the fall season. Vincent Moretti, private, enigmatic, feared Vincent Moretti, walked into his own gala with an unknown woman on his arm, and the room stopped. Not literally, of course. The string quartet kept playing, the waiters kept circulating with champagne. But conversationally, socially, energetically, the room stopped. Because the woman on Vincent's arm was not the kind of woman anyone expected to see there. She was not a model. She was not an actress. She was not a socialite or the daughter of someone powerful. She was simply a woman, a beautiful woman, yes, undeniably beautiful, but beautiful in a way that was different from the manufactured perfection that surrounded her. She was real, and in a room full of performance, reality was the most extraordinary thing in it. Vincent introduced her. Not as his date, not as his girlfriend, not as his charity project. He introduced her as his friend. "This is Margaret Hayes," he would say, and then he would step back, literally. Step back and let her talk. And Maggie talked. She talked with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a week preparing, but a lifetime observing. She told the wife of a hedge fund manager about the regulars at Rosario's, the characters and eccentrics and lonely souls who came through the door every day. And the woman laughed, a real laugh, not a social laugh, and said she hadn't heard a story that good in years. She spoke with a federal judge about the difference between the justice people receive and the justice they deserve. And the judge looked at her with the startled expression of a man encountering an idea he had not considered. She talked with a gallery owner about art, not with expertise, but with genuine feeling, and the gallery owner asked for her number. Diane watched from across the room, nursing a glass of sparkling water, and shook her head slowly. "She's the best thing in this room," Diane said to Tony, "and she has no idea." "I think she's starting to figure it out," Tony replied. But not everyone was charmed. In a far corner of the ballroom, Michael Moretti stood with a group of men, associates, business partners, members of the family's inner circle. He had been drinking, not heavily but steadily, and his face had the flushed, tight look of a man whose resentments were close to the surface. "Look at him," Michael said, gesturing toward Vincent and Maggie. "Look at that. My brother, the great reformer, the man who takes pity on the common people." "She looks good," said one of the men, a thick-necked individual named Sal Terrazzo. "I'll give him that. She looks like a costume, like a disguise. Under that dress, she's still a waitress. You can dress up a nobody, but there's still a nobody." "Easy, Mike." "Don't tell me easy. This is supposed to be our event, our night, and he's turned it into some kind of, what, a social experiment? A publicity stunt?" The men shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to agree with Michael openly, but no one wanted to contradict him either. Michael Moretti was not as powerful as his brother, but he was volatile, and volatile men in their world could be dangerous. At 10:30, Vincent led Maggie to the dance floor. The string quartet shifted to a waltz, a slow, elegant piece that turned the air to silk. Vincent held her with the practiced ease of a man who had been dancing at these events since childhood, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers at shoulder height. Maggie had not danced in years, but Grace had given her a crash course, and she found that the mechanics came back quickly. What mattered was not the technique, but the feeling, the sensation of being held, of moving in sync with another person, of being seen by 600 people and not wanting to hide. "How do you feel?" Vincent asked. "Terrified," she said, "and alive." Those two things often go together. She looked up at him. "Vincent, why did you really do this? And don't say it's about your mother." He was quiet for a moment, guiding her through a turn. "My mother is part of it. But you're right, it's not the whole story." "Then what is?" "I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who are pretending to be happier than they are, more confident than they are, more moral than they are. I am surrounded by surfaces, beautiful, expensive, perfectly maintained surfaces, and I have come to realize that I am starving for something real. When I saw you in that diner, Margaret, you were real. You were the most real person I had seen in years, and I wanted to see what would happen if the world could see it too. And if the world doesn't care? If they just see the dress and the earrings and none of the rest of it? Then the world is even more broken than I thought, but I don't think that's what's going to happen." He was right. It was not what happened. By the end of the evening, Maggie had been photographed by society photographers, quoted by a gossip columnist for The Times, who was covering the event, and invited to 3 separate dinner parties. People whose names she recognized from magazines and newspapers treated her not as a curiosity, but as a peer. She had held her own, and she had done it not by pretending to be someone she was not, but by being fully, unapologetically, visibly herself. But the most significant moment of the night came not in the ballroom, but in the corridor outside the restrooms, where Maggie encountered a woman she had not expected to see. Victoria Lane was one of New York's most prominent socialites, a former model, married to a real estate developer, known for her beauty and her ruthlessness in equal measure. She was 50 and looked 35, thanks to a personal trainer, a nutritionist, a dermatologist, and a surgeon whose name was whispered but never spoken aloud. She was everything that Maggie was not: polished, calculated, and supremely aware of her own value. Victoria had been watching Maggie all evening with the sharp eye of a woman who recognizes a threat. Because Maggie was a threat, though not in the way Victoria initially feared. Maggie was not competition for Vincent's affection. Victoria had no interest in Vincent Moretti. She was a threat to the entire system of value that Victoria had built her life around. If a waitress from a midtown diner could walk into this room and captivate it, without surgery, without social connections, without any of the tools Victoria had spent decades acquiring, then what did that say about the worth of everything Victoria had done? "You're Margaret," Victoria said, blocking the corridor with the practiced casualness of a woman accustomed to controlling spaces. "I am. I've been watching you tonight. You're quite the sensation." "I wouldn't say that." Victoria studied her. "No, you wouldn't. That's part of your appeal, isn't it? The humility, the ordinary woman-turned-princess routine. People love that narrative." Maggie recognized the hostility beneath the smooth words. She had served enough difficult customers at Rosario's to know when someone was looking for a fight. The old Maggie would have retreated, apologized, found an excuse to leave. But the old Maggie had been left at home tonight, folded neatly in a drawer next to the faded sweaters. "It's not a routine," Maggie said calmly. "I'm just wearing a different dress. Darling, you're wearing a different life. And when the clock strikes midnight and the carriage turns back into a pumpkin, you'll be right back where you started." Maggie held Victoria's gaze. "Maybe. But at least I'll know what it looks like from up here, and I'll know something else too." "What's that?" "That it's not as special as you pretend it is." Victoria's expression flickered, a hairline crack in the porcelain. Then she smiled, a thin, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Enjoy your evening, Margaret." She walked away, heels clicking on the marble floor, and Maggie stood alone in the corridor, her heart pounding, her hands trembling slightly, and a fierce burning pride rising in her chest like a flame. The morning after the gala, Maggie woke early, as she always did. For a disoriented moment, lying in her narrow bed in her small apartment, she thought the previous night had been a dream. The chandelier light, the emerald dress, the dancing, all of it dissolving in the grey morning light like something that had never been real. Then she saw the dress hanging on the back of her closet door and the earrings sitting on her bedside table, and she knew it had happened. She went to work. She put on her old sweater, pulled her hair back in its usual ponytail, pinned on her name tag, and served coffee. When Donna asked if she'd had a nice weekend, she said yes and left it at that. The disconnect between who she had been 12 hours ago and who she was now, a waitress clearing plates at table 9, was so vast that it felt like a form of vertigo. At 10:15, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Hi Maggie, this is Diane Hartwell. I don't know if you've seen, but you're on page 6 today. The headline reads, 'Mystery Woman Steals Spotlight at Moretti Gala.' There's a beautiful photo of you. Call me when you get a chance." Maggie stared at the text during her break, sitting on an overturned milk crate in the alley behind the diner. Page 6. She was on page 6. A waitress from Rosario's diner was on page 6. She called Diane, who answered on the first ring. "Don't panic," Diane said. "I'm not panicking." "Good, because there are going to be some calls, journalists mainly. A couple of media outlets want to know who you are. Look, this is a good thing, but it can also be overwhelming. I want to help you manage it." "Manage it how?" "I think you should tell your story, Margaret, not the makeover. That's the surface. Your real story, who you are, where you come from, why this matters." Maggie thought about this. She thought about all the years she had spent being invisible, all the mornings pouring coffee for people who never asked her name, all the nights alone in her apartment with a book, and a growing conviction that her life had peaked somewhere around age 25 and was now gently, irreversibly declining. She thought about what it had felt like to walk into that ballroom, to hold her head high, to be seen. "Okay," she said, "but on my terms." Diane arranged a sit-down interview with a journalist she trusted, a writer for a major magazine named Sarah Chen, who specialized in human interest stories and had a reputation for treating her subjects with respect. The interview took place 2 days later at a quiet cafe in the West Village and lasted 3 hours. Maggie told Sarah everything: the years at the diner, the loneliness, the broken engagement, the slow erosion of self-worth that happens when the world treats you as if you don't exist. She talked about Vincent, carefully, without revealing details of his personal life or business, but honestly about his generosity and his belief in her. She talked about Eleanor and David and Grace and Richard, the team that had helped her transform. And she talked about the gala, the fear and the exhilaration and the moment in the corridor with Victoria Lane, which she described without naming Victoria. "What was the most surprising part?" Sarah asked. Maggie thought for a long time. The most surprising part was that nothing actually changed. I mean, physically, yes, the hair, the clothes, the makeup. But the woman who walked into that ballroom was the same woman who walks into Rosario's every morning. The same brain, the same heart, the same stories. The only thing that changed was that people were willing to listen. The article ran 2 weeks later. It was thoughtful, well-written and compassionate. It did not sensationalize. It did not reduce Maggie to a makeover story. It was, Sarah wrote, a story about visibility, about the arbitrary line between the people the world sees and the people it doesn't, and about what happens when that line is erased. The response was enormous. The article was shared hundreds of thousands of times across social media. Comments poured in from women and men who recognized themselves in Maggie's story, people who had felt invisible, people who had been told in 1,000 small ways that they were not worth noticing. The article struck a nerve that was deeper and more raw than anyone had anticipated, and then the complications began. Michael Moretti read the article, or rather, someone read it to him, because Michael was not a man who spent much time with magazines. He listened, his face growing darker with every paragraph. And when it was finished, he picked up his phone and called his brother. "You've lost your mind," Michael said. "Good morning to you too, Michael. Do you understand what you've done? You've put our name in the press, our family name, in a magazine article about some waitress you picked up like, be very careful how you finish that sentence. People are laughing at us, Vincent. The DeLucas, the Constantinos, everyone. They think you've gone soft. They think the great Vincent Moretti has turned into some kind of philanthropist. I am a philanthropist. I run a charitable foundation. That's a front, and you know it. It's not a front, it's real, just like Margaret is real. Jesus, Vin, You're not involved with her, are you? Is this... My relationship with Margaret is not your concern. Everything about this family is my concern. And what I'm telling you is that this stunt of yours is making waves, the wrong kind of waves." "Noted," Vincent said, and hung up. He should have taken his brother more seriously. In the weeks that followed, the article continued to generate attention, and with attention came scrutiny, not of Maggie, but of Vincent. Journalists began looking into the Moretti Foundation, asking questions about its funding, its operations, its connections to the family's other business interests. A local TV reporter did a segment on the gala, focusing on the guest list and noting the presence of several individuals with, as the reporter delicately put it, controversial business associations. None of this was new. The Moretti family had lived under a cloud of innuendo and suspicion for decades, but they had always managed it through a combination of careful public relations, generous philanthropy, and the simple fact that no law enforcement agency had ever been able to build a case that stuck. The strategy was simple. Stay quiet, stay private, stay out of the spotlight. And Vincent had just put them directly in it. Tony raised the issue one evening, over scotch in Vincent's study. "The attention isn't going away, Vin. If anything, it's growing. People are interested in you now. They're looking at the foundation, the businesses, all of it. Let them. Look, everything is clean. Everything on the surface is clean, but you know as well as I do that if someone digs deep enough, they won't find anything. I've spent 15 years making sure of that. And Michael, he's not as careful as you. His operations in Jersey are his problem. They're all our problem, Vin. That's how this works. You know that." Vincent swirled his scotch, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe you've made your point. The gala was a success. The article was beautiful. Margaret has been seen. Maybe it's time to step back. Let things cool down." "Step back from what? From Margaret?" "From the spotlight." Vincent considered this. Tony was rarely wrong about these things. He had an instinct for danger that had kept Vincent alive and free for 3 decades. But Vincent was also a man of conviction, and once he had committed to something, to someone, he did not abandon it easily. "I'll think about it," he said. Meanwhile, Maggie's life had been transformed in ways that went far beyond the cosmetic. The attention from the article had opened doors she had not known existed. The gallery owner she had met at the gala, a woman named Isabel Rojas, invited her to an opening. A non-profit that worked with underprivileged women contacted her about speaking at their annual conference. A literary agent reached out, asking if she had ever considered writing about her experiences. She said yes to all of it. Not because she was seduced by the attention, in fact she found the attention exhausting and slightly bewildering, but because she recognized, with a clarity that surprised her, that she had been given something rare, a platform, a chance to be heard, and she had things to say. She continued working at Rosario's. She refused to quit, despite Diane's gentle suggestion that her time might be better spent elsewhere. The diner was her anchor, the place where she was still just Maggie, where the coffee was still bad, and Arthur still ordered his plain bagel at 7:15, and the fluorescent light still buzzed in that particular way that was more comforting than any chandelier. But changes were happening there too. Sal, who had heard about the article from his granddaughter, pulled Maggie aside one morning with tears in his eyes. "Kid," he said, "I always knew you were something special. I just didn't know the rest of the world would figure it out. Don't make me cry, Sal. I've got tables. Let 'em wait. I want to say something. I'm proud of you. Whatever happens next, I'm proud of you. Donna, for her part, was simultaneously thrilled and indignant. I knew it, she said. I knew something was going on. The standing straighter, the smiling, I called it. I want credit for calling it. You get full credit, Donna, and I want to meet this Vincent. We'll see. It was during this period, this strange, suspended time when Maggie was living between two worlds, that something unexpected happened. Vincent Moretti, the man who had orchestrated everything, the puppet master, the benefactor, the man who insisted that he wanted nothing in return, began to realize that he wanted something in return after all. He wanted her, not in a predatory way, not in the way that powerful men typically want things, to possess, to control, to add to their collection. He wanted her company. He wanted to hear her voice. He wanted to sit across from her at dinner and listen to her stories about the diner and Arthur and Donna. He wanted to walk through Central Park with her on a Sunday afternoon and hear what she thought about the trees, the light, the way the city sounded different at different times of day. He wanted, for the first time in decades, to know someone, really know them. He did not act on it immediately. Vincent Moretti was, above all things, a man of discipline. He had promised Maggie no strings, and he intended to keep that promise. But the longing was there, growing quietly in the background like a vine climbing a wall, and he could not pretend it wasn't. Maggie sensed it. She was perceptive. You do not spend 11 years reading people in a diner without developing a finely tuned antenna for unspoken feelings. She sensed the way his eyes lingered on her, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the small courtesies that went beyond mere politeness. And she felt, well, she was not sure what she felt. Gratitude, certainly. Admiration for his intelligence and his vision. A growing comfort in his presence that was different from anything she had experienced with a man before. But was it more than that? Could it be more than that? The gap between them was enormous, not just in wealth and power, but in the fundamental realities of their lives. He was Vincent Moretti. She was Maggie Hayes. He lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. She lived in a walk-up overlooking a brick wall. He made decisions that affected hundreds of lives. She decided whether to give Arthur decaf or regular. The distance between them was not just economic, it was existential. And yet, in the quiet moments, in the conversations that stretched into the evening, in the way he listened to her as if nothing she said was unimportant, in those moments the distance shrank to nothing. 5 weeks after the gala, the crisis arrived. And it came, as crises often do, not from the direction anyone was watching. It was a Wednesday evening. Maggie was at home reading when her phone rang. It was Tony Russo. Maggie, listen carefully. His voice was tight, strained. Something has happened. I need you to stay home tonight. Don't go out. Don't answer the door for anyone you don't know. Tony, what? Michael has done something stupid. I can't explain right now, but Vincent is dealing with it. He wanted me to call you to make sure you were safe. Safe from what? Just stay home, please. He hung up before she could ask anything else. Maggie sat on the edge of her bed, her heart pounding, the book forgotten in her lap. She thought about calling Vincent, but something told her not to. Whatever was happening was serious, and calling him might make it worse. She learned the details later in fragments over the next several days. Michael Moretti, driven by resentment and a deteriorating business situation in New Jersey, had done something reckless. He had entered into an arrangement with a rival family, the DeLucas, that directly undermined Vincent's authority and threatened the stability of the entire Moretti operation. It was, in the language of their world, an act of profound disloyalty, a crossing of lines that could not be uncrossed. The specifics were complex, business deals gone wrong, territory disputes, alliances formed behind closed doors, but the emotional core was simple. Michael believed that Vincent had gone soft, that his obsession with the waitress, as Michael called her, was a symptom of weakness that would eventually bring the family down. And Michael had decided to take matters into his own hands, to shore up the family's position through his own alliances, his own deals, his own ruthless calculations. The problem was that Michael's ruthless calculations were not as good as he thought they were. The DeLucas were not allies. They were predators, and they had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity, a crack in the Moretti Foundation, a younger brother, willing to undermine his elder. They had played Michael beautifully, extracting concessions and information while giving nothing of value in return. Vincent found out through his own intelligence network, a web of informants and loyalists that stretched across the eastern seaboard, and moved with the swift surgical decisiveness that had made him the most formidable figure in his world. In the space of 72 hours, he dismantled the DeLuca arrangement, neutralized the threat to his operations, and confronted his brother. The confrontation took place at their family home in Bensonhurst, the house where they had grown up, where their mother had sewn dresses in the back room and their father had held court in the kitchen. It was the kind of setting that made the conversation feel both intimate and weighted with history. "You tried to go around me," Vincent said. He was standing. Michael was sitting. The dynamic was intentional. "I was trying to protect this family." "By betraying it? By doing what you wouldn't? You've been distracted, Vin. This woman, this project of yours, it's taken your eye off what matters. Margaret has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this. You spent weeks playing dress-up while the DeLucas were circling. You threw a party while our business was under threat. You put our name in the papers for God's sake. Our name has been in the papers before. Not like this. Not in a way that invites attention. People are asking questions, Vincent. Journalists, prosecutors, none of whom have found anything because there is nothing to find. Because you've been careful. But careful has limits. And every time you step into the spotlight with that woman, those limits get tested." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was not angry. It was weary, profoundly, bone-deep weary. "Michael, our mother died believing she was invisible. She spent her entire life in service to this family, and the world never once acknowledged her existence. She was brilliant and kind and beautiful, and she died in this house in the back room where she worked, and the obituary was 4 lines long. 4 lines for a life that deserved 1,000. Don't bring Mom into this. She's already in this. She's been in this from the beginning. Margaret is not a project or a distraction or a weakness. She is proof that the world is wrong about people like our mother, like her, like anyone who has been told that they are not enough." "That's a beautiful speech, Vin, but it doesn't change the reality." "Maybe the reality needs to change." The brothers stared at each other. Outside, a car horn sounded in the distance. A dog barked, the mundane sounds of a Brooklyn neighborhood continuing its life, oblivious to the seismic shift happening inside these walls. "I'm going to ask you something," Vincent said, "and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Are you with me or not?" "I'm your brother." "That's not what I asked." The silence stretched. Michael's jaw worked. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. Years of resentment, years of feeling second best, years of living in the shadow of a brother who was smarter, stronger, more capable. All of it was there in his face, visible as a wound. "I'm with you," Michael said finally. "I've always been with you." "Then act like it. No more side deals, no more undermining, and no more disrespecting Margaret. She is part of my life. And you will treat her accordingly." Michael nodded. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of a surrender. Maggie learned about the confrontation from Tony, who told her a carefully edited version that omitted the most sensitive details but conveyed the essential truth, that Michael's antagonism had been addressed and that Vincent had defended her. "He went to bat for you," Tony said. "I've known him 30 years, and I've never seen him put himself on the line for someone like that. Not for a business deal, not for a partnership, for a person, for you. Is he okay? He's Vincent. He's always okay. But I think this shook him more than he's showing. Family means everything to him. Having to confront Michael, having to choose, that cost him something." Maggie sat with this information for a long time. She thought about the cost of the transformation, not the financial cost, which was abstract and meaningless to her, but the human cost. The disruption it had caused in Vincent's family, The attention it had drawn, the complications it had created. She had been so focused on her own experience, the wonder and terror and exhilaration of being seen, that she had not fully considered what it was costing the man who had made it possible. She went to see him, not to his penthouse, which still intimidated her, but to Rosario's, where everything had begun. She called him and asked him to come, and he did, arriving the next morning at 8:45, exactly as he had that first day, in a dark suit with Tony at his side. She brought him coffee. The same terrible coffee. He drank it. "I want to say something," she said, standing beside his booth, her apron tied at her waist, her hair back in its ponytail, no makeup on her face. She looked in that moment exactly as she had the day they met, and Vincent, looking at her, thought she had never looked more beautiful. "I know what happened with Michael," she said. "I know what it cost you, and I want you to know that I am not going to be the thing that tears your family apart. If this is causing problems, if I'm causing problems, I will walk away, no hard feelings, no regrets." "You're not causing problems." "Tony told me." "Tony talks too much." A slight smile. "Margaret, listen to me. What Michael did was not about you. It was about him, his insecurities, his ambitions, his resentments. You were the excuse, not the cause. And even if you were the cause, I would make the same choice. Every time. Why?" And there it was, the question that had been hovering between them for weeks, unasked and unanswered. Why? Not why the makeover, not why the gala, but why her? Why, of all the people in the world, had Vincent Moretti looked at a tired waitress in a faded sweater and decided that she mattered? "Because," Vincent said, and for the first time since Maggie had known him, he seemed to struggle for words. The man who always knew exactly what to say, who chose. His words, with the precision of a surgeon, was searching. "Because you remind me of everything I'm supposed to be fighting for. Not power, not money, not territory, but the idea that people are worth more than the world gives them credit for. You remind me that there is still something worth believing in." He paused. "And because I have fallen in love with you, Margaret Hayes, somewhere between the bad coffee and the plain bagels and the way you stand up to anyone who tries to make you feel small, I have fallen completely, irrevocably in love with you." The diner was quiet. The morning rush hadn't started yet. Arthur hadn't arrived for his 7:15 bagel. Sal was in the back. Donna was on her phone by the register. It was just the two of them in a booth by the window, in a diner on 10th Avenue, and the silence between them was the most eloquent thing either of them had ever heard. "I know the distance between us is enormous," Vincent continued. "I know who I am and what I am, and what that means. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Maggie sat down across from him. She set the coffee pot on the table. She looked at this man, this complicated, dangerous, generous, brilliant man who had looked at her and seen something no one else had bothered to see, and she felt the last wall inside her crumble. "The distance," she said slowly, "is not as far as you think." She reached across the table and took his hand. 6 months later, on a warm evening in April, the Cherry Blossom Festival was in full bloom in Central Park, and Maggie Hayes, Margaret Moretti, as she had recently quietly become, stood on the balcony of the penthouse on Central Park West and looked out at a city that had once made her feel invisible. She no longer felt invisible. The month since that morning in the diner had been, there was no other word for it, extraordinary. Not because her life had become easy or glamorous, though. There were certainly elements of both, but because she had, for the first time, stepped fully into the person she had always been capable of being. She had spoken at the non-profit conference, delivering a 20-minute address about visibility, value, and the cost of being overlooked, that received a standing ovation and was later published as an essay in a major outlet. She had begun working with Diane at the Moretti Foundation, not as a figurehead, but as an active participant, helping to develop programs that provided mentorship, professional development, and yes, transformations, though Maggie insisted on that last word being understood broadly, for women in underserved communities. She had written a short piece for a magazine about her experience, And the response had been overwhelming. Thousands of messages from people who saw themselves in her story. She was working on something longer, a full account that the literary agent thought could become a book. She wrote at the kitchen table of the penthouse, usually early in the morning before Vincent was awake, when the city was quiet and the light coming through the windows was soft and forgiving. She still went to Rosario's. Not every day, but often enough that Sal did not feel abandoned. She would sit at the counter, drink Sal's terrible coffee, and talk with Donna and the regulars. Arthur still came at 7:15. He still ordered the plain bagel, toasted. He still read his newspaper. But now, when Maggie sat down next to him, he would fold the paper and say, "Tell me what you're writing about today, kid." And she would tell him, and he would nod and listen with the grave attention of a man who believes that every story matters. Vincent and Maggie's relationship had settled into something that surprised them both with its ease. She had expected the differences between them, in background, in lifestyle, in the fundamental geography of their daily lives, to be a constant source of friction. Instead, they were a source of richness. She taught him to see the beauty in ordinary things, the light in a diner at dawn, the sound of rain on a fire escape, the particular magic of a good conversation with a stranger. He taught her to see the possibility in extraordinary ones, to think bigger, aim higher, believe that the scope of her life was not fixed, but expandable. They were married in January, in a small ceremony in the penthouse, with only family and close friends present. Maggie wore a simple, ivory dress that David Chen designed for her. Elegant, understated, perfect. She wore Rosa's diamond earrings. Tony was Vincent's best man. Karen flew in from Ohio and cried through the entire ceremony. Sal catered the reception with food from the diner, sandwiches and coffee and a cake that his granddaughter made. And it was, everyone agreed, the best food at any event in the history of the Moretti family. Michael came to the wedding. He shook Maggie's hand and said simply, "Welcome to the family." It was not warm exactly, but it was not hostile. It was a start. Maggie, who understood something about the pain of feeling invisible and undervalued, recognized in Michael a man fighting his own version of the same battle, and she made a quiet decision to extend him the same grace that Vincent had extended to her, not because he deserved it, necessarily, but because grace was not something that needed to be deserved to be given. The world continued to be interested in their story. There were profiles and interviews and invitations. Maggie navigated this attention with the same grounded calm that had characterized her from the beginning, saying yes when it felt right, no when it didn't, and never losing sight of who she was underneath whatever she happened to be wearing. On this April evening, standing on the balcony with the cherry blossoms visible as soft pink clouds in the darkening park below, Maggie thought about the distance she had traveled. Not from Rosario's diner to Central Park West. That was just geography. But from the woman who looked in the mirror and saw no one, to the woman who looked in the mirror and saw herself. Vincent came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He was still in his suit. He had come from a meeting, and he smelled of cologne and the particular clean scent that was uniquely his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Your mother." He was quiet. "I think about her a lot," Maggie said. "I think about what?" she would say if she could see all of this. "I think she would say that it took you long enough." Maggie laughed. "She sounds like my kind of woman. She would have loved you. I think I would have loved her too." They stood together in the gathering dusk, looking out at the city, this enormous, indifferent, miraculous city that had tried to make Maggie invisible and failed. Because invisibility, she had learned, was not something the world imposed on you. It was something you accepted. And the moment you stopped accepting it, the moment you looked in the mirror and said, "I see you," the world had no choice but to see you too. The last light faded from the sky. The streetlights came on, thousands of them, turning the city into a constellation that rivaled the stars. Somewhere far below, in a diner on 10th Avenue, Sal was wiping down the counter and setting up for the morning rush. Arthur's coffee cup was already set out at his usual spot, waiting. And the table by the window, the one where a powerful man had once sat and seen something extraordinary in an ordinary woman, was empty and clean, waiting for whoever would sit there next, waiting for whoever was ready to be seen. That is the story of Margaret Hayes, the woman the world overlooked until one man refused to, not because he changed her, but because he helped her see what had been there all along. The makeover was real, the dress was real, the earrings and the gala and the champagne and the chandelier light were all real. But the real transformation had nothing to do with any of those things. The real transformation was this: a woman who had spent 41 years believing she was ordinary finally understood that she never was. And once you know that, once you really truly know it, the world can never make you invisible again. If you watched until here, it is because this story touched something real inside you. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and see who really connects with the stories on this channel. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your life who deserve to be seen, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes a story is exactly what someone needs at exactly the right moment. Be the person who sends it. And if you are not yet subscribed, now is the time. This channel tells the stories the world forgets, stories about real people, real struggles, and the moments that change everything. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you are here for the next one, because the next one might be the story that changes your day or your week or maybe even the way you see yourself. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most powerful transformation in the world is not a new dress or a new haircut. It is the moment you decide that you are worth seeing.